start, and then if there's any late people, then I can just let them in. So thanks very much for joining today's Boardroom. My name's Jo Thompson and I work for HR Recruit. We had a really good session last week that was facilitated by Susi and Karen, and Susi and Karen are facilitating session 2. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Susi and Karen.
Lovely, thanks, Jo. Lovely to be here again and to see some faces that were here last week. That's brilliant. So we'll continue with, I'm just going to get my slides up. And we'll continue with our session, a coaching culture. And this second one is talking more about the process that we work through and some diagnostic tools that we work with. But just to say, before we move forward, if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat. Karen's going to keep an eye on that. And we will have an opportunity for a breakout about a third of the way through, and where then we can come back and talk about your thoughts and questions that come out of that, because I believe most people get a lot out of those breakout sessions. So we will be doing that. And as you know, this is webinar number 2 of, or as you may know, of 4. There's another one next week and then a final one on the 20th of November. And at the end of that, we will be, Karen and I will be sending out an information pack and the slides to those who request and or have attended the webinars. It's at the end because I'm hoping again to come to all of them, you see, because it makes much more sense if you get a feel for the 4 as they build up into a bigger picture for you all. And talking about pictures, you can probably see on this slide, I'm hoping you can all see the slides, that there's a carriage. And apparently the term coaching literally comes from an old Anglo-Saxon word for a carriage. In a nutshell, coaching is a vehicle of transport, to transport a client from where he is now in his life to where he wants to be, or he or she, I should say. But the Anglo-Saxons weren't very PC. But I thought that was quite a curious little tidbit. But anyhow, just a quick review of last week, which was really great. We went into breakouts, and some of the people in those breakout groups were talking about the fact that they are starting to introduce a coaching culture in their organizations, which is so exciting. One of the things I think that came out as well, not from everybody, but that I'm hearing, is that often coaching culture starts as sort of through HR with the management level and is often not work from the top downwards. So that's something that we will look at as we go on. But I hope this starts to build your knowledge around coaching culture. And I think those that have experienced it, would be lovely to hear more of your thoughts later. So if I move on, how does our offering work? Most importantly, when we work with a client, we are working from the top downwards. So we are very much working with the leader, the MD, and ideally, that person has already got an interest or even a passion in building a coaching culture, because changing a culture, as Peter Hawkins says, can take time in a business, and it means everyone focused on it. Starting at the top, that leads by example, and hopefully that person is also asking the right questions. It's not about do and tell, it's actually asking those questions, because we're also looking, I think, particularly since the pandemic, but in the 21st century, we're looking for leaders that are not heroes, but leaders that actually ask the questions. As Jim Collins says in his book, Good to Great, CEOs need to be asking the questions, not giving the solutions. And what we love about coaching culture is it's all about that, living and breathing, talking to each other, asking questions, opening up that ability to be innovative and creative. So we start with that initial discussion with the client, and team leaders we need to meet with as well, because we work in teams, and both Karen and I are qualified team coaches, and we use our team coaching expertise to bring out even more potential in that team. And we will work, in a series of workshops with those individuals' teams. And the most important element of that is a diagnostic tool that we use called Performance Climate System. I will say a little bit more about that in a moment, and we will hear about it in a lot more detail next Thursday, when the CEO of PCS will come and talk about the assessment and how it helps. But that the tools facilitate us to have much deeper and much richer conversations. And also, as you can see our picture here, it's those light bulb moments. It's actually starting to understand each other and develop a sort of collaborative and collective approach in the teams, because teams don't work if they aren't operating at the collective level. And starting to do some coaching with the teams, training, support, more about that a bit later, and really coaching in the moment. And then we actually run a final review. So with the PCS, we run a shorter version 6 months later to see where you've got to. And it can be really motivational, because it sort of gives you a roadmap for where you were and where you've got to. And I can tell you there'll always be some changes, and positive changes as well. So there's always that continuous sort of feedback loop that we work with. Are there any questions at this point before I move on? Okay, let's move on. So I thought, before I go into the diagnostic tools in a bit more detail that we work with and that are so important and relevant to developing a coaching culture, we'd just get in there and have a breakout session. And in that breakout session, I'd really like you to start thinking about, or just sharing experiences of what diagnostic tools you've used, psychometrics, assessments, there's a whole range, as you know. And what is their value? But what is their value in particular for those who are going through a coaching culture development at the moment? What is their value in that process? So I think we'll take about 10 to 12 minutes, Jo, for that, if you wouldn't mind forming those breakout groups. And I think Karen and I will be popped into one as well. We'll move about. And then we'll come out of that and we'll share some thoughts and questions, if that's okay with everybody. Hi, everybody. So I found that fascinating. Thank you to my group for letting me listen in. Who would like to add, to share any thoughts and experiences, questions that came out of your group?
I'd like to raise one point that I thought was very valuable, which I hadn't thought about it, but it just highlighted it, was the fact that coaching is often seen as a performance management tool.
Yeah.
And that's a real barrier. That's a real barrier. I see it as a development tool, but it was a real problem selling it differently.
Yes, I've heard that before, and that. Thank you for that comment, Jose. I think it sadly is perceived that way, and I think also, though, with coaching culture, we're looking at something much broader than just that one-to-one coaching. Yet we have to get over that perception if senior managers, sort of the CEOs or whatever, are going to be interested in looking at a coaching culture. I think it's something that not a lot of people really understand. Karen, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, the group that we were that I was kindly added to. Thank you. We were talking about a variety of tools that people had experienced, but we were actually talking about being really clear about what coaching is, the organisation being really clear about what it is, that the organisation ensuring that if they've got coaches in that they're qualified, that they know what they're doing, and that they're well selected, and that there has to be leadership buy-in. It has to start right at the top, because you can't start making changes to any culture without the leadership buy-in.
And anyone from the group, same group that Karen was in, did you want to add anything to that? Anyone else got any comments? Maybe from Kate, did you want to add anything? We were talking about what your company's doing.
Yeah, I think it's pulling on it more. We use ours as the tools that we've got just form a basis of self-awareness to then build your coaching on. So it can tell individuals about their preferences or how others might work for them. So we've got 3 or 4 that we use: Savills, Wave Assessment, Insight, Strength Scope. And each one can offer different things, but then the individual's got a basis for which the coach can then work with afterwards to help inform that, or take them on the journey, or develop their action plan, or understand, that reflective piece of what's going on. So we often like to use it sort of early doors just to form a basis. But I think I didn't share this in a group, but it's important to understand what the coach or the client wants to get out from the sessions to see if it's useful to have or not. And it's just playing out what's their end goal, and therefore is this just useful as a baseline or an understanding piece to then use going forward.
Yes, because you have got a 3-year program you were talking about, where all the leaders have bought into that and are about to sign it off.
Yeah, so we've got a 3-year leadership program. Our managers haven't had proper training before in leadership, management, people skills. So they've started off the first session using insights. So they get an insights profile, they go on the module to understand what's that mean. Then they have a one-to-one coaching session about their profile. Some of them then have further follow-ups if they need it. And that profile then forms the basis of all the modules going forward over 3 years. So they learn about what it means to interact with others. And then in the new year, we'll then sort of work around then introduce coaching. So how they use coaching skills to work with others, remembering their insights and how different people work and how they work. And then we'll accredit people through. So ours is built, coaching will get built into that framework separately, as well as also to say this is how you can have individual or team coaching to address other needs around it.
That's excellent that coaching is built in, and it also feels to me as if that 3-year program could work nicely with thinking about moving into a coaching culture. And I know you were saying that because your leaders haven't had any of this training, you're very much starting with the basics, but I'd really like to celebrate and acknowledge that they've bought into it and really want to change that frame of reference effectively. And I think any psychometric, I know some people have done insights, but there are a number of others which we're going to mention in a moment, if people are sharing them, I've had coachees where they've been sharing with somebody they've had an issue with, and actually it's totally cleared up that relationship as they start to understand each other. Any other comments before we thank you, Kate, that's really useful.
Susie, I have one comment, which is why I'm here, is that my observation is that work is changing significantly, not just the location, but the type of work we're going to be doing and how we interact. I mentioned in the group that we used a thing called ONA, Organizational Network Analysis, in my previous organization, to identify where people were in the organization, how they were interacting. And I think this is critical. Without coaching, we're not going to make it.
Wonderful. And tell me, what without coaching, we're not going to make it. What does that mean to you?
We can't continue in a command and control mentality for managers and leaders and team leaders. It just doesn't work.
Yes.
We have to develop people, particularly with the amount of change in skills and requirements and the way they interact.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, of course, I would be supporting that. But hearing you say that is sort of heat to my heart, because I absolutely agree. And as Peter Hawkins, you probably heard of Peter Hawkins, has said recently that 20th century managers of do and tell, being the hero, has to go out of the door. Yeah, I can see your body languages, and that we need to be asking the questions, providing the environment to be innovative, creative, inclusive, collaborative, all those things. If we're and one of the reasons Karen and I have trained as team coaches is because teams are going to make this happen. Teams are going to enable, actually take forward the coaching cultures. So, I actually find this all very exciting. And so it's great to hear you say that. Anyone else want to add to what Jose said, or anything else that came out of your discussions? Okay. Thank you very much. Those contributions were great. Let me carry on with our presentation. And we will have hopefully some time for the end. We've got till 1:30 today, so we've got half an hour. So thank you for those thoughts. I'm just trying to get my slides to go on. Yep, we've got your feedback. So that's really brilliant. And then any other thoughts you can just put into the chat. One of the things I mentioned earlier on, that we're working with a number of diagnostic tools, and the main diagnostic tool that we're working with is called Performance Climate System. I don't know if anyone's come across this before. I also mentioned that Gordon McKenzie of PCS, the CEO and founder, is going to be with us next Thursday to talk about this, really talk you through how this can impact on development in particularly leadership development in businesses, and particularly how it sits really nicely with the ICF, the Institute of Coaching Foundation, their coaching culture model. And so the PCS model sits really nicely with that and helps us to create that shift into a very different way of working. And so, PCS was developed using a number of models, but one in particular, I suspect most of you have heard of Tuckman's model, the forming, storming, norming, performing model. It's one we always know about, that one that sort of, so there are a lot of leadership models that form the foundation of PCS, and it was founded through a desire to improve the well-being and performance of teams. So it felt to Karen and I that it just sits really nicely with what we're trying to do in working with our team coaching approach, as well as looking at moving into a coaching culture. And this diagnostic actually allows you to objectively measure team and leadership performance. And what we particularly like about it is it gives you some text, as a result of going through the assessment. All the team members and the leaders take part in this assessment. All of that is pulled together, and then you get not just text, because Insights comes up with a lot of text. And personally, what I love is the graphics. So they come up with a lot of really easy to read graphics that presents where are the team members and where are the leaders in this process. And probably inevitably, there is a gap. And that gap we then start to work on in our building the coaching culture and looking at how can we build the team as well. So all of that, I think, generates the greatest performance change towards a coaching culture. As I say, more about that next week, where the go and tell us what was behind it, where it's going, how it can be used, and not just with individuals, but in lots of teams. We can use it across lots of teams. So it's a very flexible and inexpensive process to go through. Karen, before I move on, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, other than the fact that it's a great tool. It looks at the transactional and the transformational aspects of how the team is working, how the leader's working. It gives some great insights into the gaps between the leader's perception of where they think the team is and team's perception. And those gaps are the bits that you can then start to work on to create high-performing teams.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, well, you can tell we quite like it. Okay, we also, between us, Karen and I, are qualified to work with a range of different diagnostic tools. I've qualified to work with Korn Ferry, their Talent Q suite, which Dimensions is their psychometric which focuses on people in work. It's quite focused on work, not work and life, and it provides a whole different reports as well. So there's one called Leadership Derailer, for example. So it can look at when is your leader likely to go off the rails effectively, what pushes them so much that they're not able to cope. And it looks at their behaviors in relation to three key areas, sort of drivers and emotions. And these are people and relationships, tasks and projects. And again, I use it a lot in one-to-one coaching because it really opens up the conversations, a bit like Kate was saying, around insights, and sharing that information with others as well is really powerful. And it brings about more effective interactions at work, no matter who and where people are. And as Jose says, I think with the changes in work, the more we can know about our own leadership styles and are those appropriate, the more successful the organizations are going to be, and the happier we are going to be in our jobs, particularly through a coaching culture. We're much more working in the moment, working together. So, and another one is DISC, and Karen, you're going to give us an overview of DISC because you work with that one, and I'm sure people have heard about DISC as well.
Yes, I'm a qualified DISC assessor. DISC looks at individuals' behavioural preferences in 4 key areas: dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. And we all have varying strengths in those areas. But what I like about DISC is that it provides you with 3 different graphs. The report that I do, it gives you a graph of your perception of how you're behaving at work. It gives you a graph and it plots it in the areas, gives you a graph in terms of what your core innate behaviors are. And then it gives you a graph about how you are really behaving at work. And the gaps between those are really useful in terms of identifying where people are being pushed into positions where they're not entirely comfortable. And the other thing with DISC is it helps you to understand your behavior and the behavior of those who you work with, and their preferences in terms of how you deal with them. So if you know that your boss is an extremely high D on the dominance scale, you don't go into him with the problem, you go into him, describe the problem and what you think the solution is, and then you start the discussion, because that's what he expects. So enough from me about DISC.
Excellent, thank you, Karen. And AQAI, well, I think you've all heard about IQ and EQ. And now there is AQ, and AQI has developed the first ever view on an adaptability assessment. And it's particularly pertinent since the pandemic, because when we're dealing with so much uncertainty, and uncertainty that we just haven't experienced before, and also we will continue to work with uncertainty, this again is an assessment that helps individuals to recognize where they are at the moment and assess where they'd like to be, and then to work on that gap. And different roles, different people will require different strengths in adaptability. And they've done a huge amount of academic research, so it's very well supported by that. It measures the abilities, characteristics, and environmental factors. So what I like about it is it even takes into account what's it like to work in your company, in your organization. What's the environment like? And because all of those things are factors towards how stressed we might be, and therefore how flexible, how resilient, how agile. Agile is a word that's been bounced about an awful lot. And so this helps organizations to consider how can they best and most effectively respond to uncertainty. And the final one is what I call QOP, Qualities of Practice, which has been developed by a group of women, and one in particular did a lot of research into leadership and leadership styles. And just quickly, I'll share the 3 I love the metaphor she uses. She talks about the eagle, the omnipresent leader, which, you know, Jose was talking earlier about how having that omnipotent sort of leader is you know, the hero is no longer what we need, yet at times leaders will need to be in that role. Then the other one is the skein of geese, and if ever any of you have watched a skein of geese fly across the sky, you will hear them talking to each other in a V shape, and they shift from the front to the back. So there's no one particular leader, they're all leaders, because we are all leaders. And if we're going to work in teams, that's how it needs to operate. And then if you think of the third one is a murmurization of starlings. How on earth do they all make those beautiful shapes? You know, they're working very, very closely, and communication is the key thing. So she looked at the different leadership styles and has developed a tool which enables some very powerful conversations. And it originated with a pack of cards, 52 of them, and they were 52 because it was meant to be fun. It's meant to be playful, yet also heightened learning as a result of it. But now it's all online, like everything else with the pandemic. And it takes anyone, but leaders in particular, through what qualities are you using now? What qualities would you like to add to that? What qualities are being eclipsed? And it really gets them to start thinking about, you know, what am I? Who am I? Why am I as a leader? So again, all of these can be offered. It's not, you know, because anything that Karen and I talk with about the client is very much tailor-made. Every organization is distinct and has different needs for all sorts of reasons. So, but we believe that these sorts of diagnostic tools are key to enabling us having some much deeper, and I think, don't know if it was Kate or one of my groups said more reflective conversations. Might have been Isabel actually, but more reflective rather than so out of the sort of logical, practical brain, but more into being getting under the waterline, as we might talk about it with the iceberg, and having deeper conversations, particularly if you're wanting to make a major culture shift into something that's been do and tell, into let's talk about it. What are your views? Providing an environment to be innovative, creative, and inclusive, and really cohesive. I don't know how many of you can had experience of yearly or biannual reviews. I have, and I've never had a good one. And often they're 6 months later than something that occurred. And how on earth can you have conversations that are fair, just, and sensible, and that are developmental around something that happened ages ago? You know, whereas if it happens, you know, the coaching style is what went well, what could you do differently, how are we going to learn from that and move forward? It's very much about here we are in the present, let's move into the, you know, get this moving into the future. So very different types of conversations, and bringing all that potential out from lots of people, you know, because you're breaking down, being more vulnerable, being allowed to be vulnerable. If you come across Brené Brown, anybody, you know, actually speaking out, you know, being courageous and knowing it's okay, and that there's a psychological safety that allows you to do that. So moving on. One of the things that Karen and I have been talking about is we just love the C words, because there are so many of them, so many positive ones, you know, coaching culture, for example, 2 of them, but there are 5 that we've decided that we really would like to focus on. And of course, there are lots more, but I think if you can focus on this, as this picture here says, you can really make it happen. You can dream big and make something happen, and you can do it together. And it is about having the confidence to do that. And I think working through from, you know, the leader downwards through the teams, that's how you can build confidence, because you'll do it together. When you're sailing a ship or sailing a boat and you've got 14 of you on that boat, you need to be working together to point it in the right direction. Otherwise, there are going to be big issues. And I can tell you, I know that firsthand. And, you know, the competence If the competence isn't there, then you can help to develop that. And I think, again, working in a coaching culture, you can learn from others that competence. It doesn't have to be go on a training course. It's, you know, it's seeing the right role models walking around. It's knowing what the values are, knowing what, that was something that came out of our session actually about values. And it's making sure your values are matched to your culture and are matched to a coaching culture. You know, do those values mean you can move into a coaching culture, and is that competence there? And the coherence, collaboration is just absolutely essential, and congruence. So as I say, there are lots of C words. Don't know if there's anything you want to add there, Karen, at this stage.
No, I think I'd like to pull out on the collaboration bit. I've just been doing some recruiting for one of my major clients, and at every single interview, that word collaboration has come up, the importance of team collaboration and within the team and collaboration across the organization. And I think, given the conversations we've had earlier about the changing world of work, I do think that's going to be high on the list of, I think, the work that we'll be doing with organisations.
And I think what some of the words that have been important throughout the pandemic in the business world, words like trust, and that vulnerability can build trust. You know, if a CEO can walk in and say, actually, you know, I'm really struggling with all this, working from home and trying to sort the kids out and trying to do my work, you know, how is it for you guys? If you can share that vulnerability, you build your trust. If you build your trust, you'll get collaboration. I'm sorry, those V and T, it doesn't work, it doesn't start with C, but so, you know, I think all of those, actually being a little bit more humble, showing, you know, humility, those words, attitudes are really important at this stage, I think, in business to survive. So that sort of brings us towards the end of this webinar. Are there any questions or thoughts that anybody would like to share at this stage? Jose, have you got any further thoughts you'd like to share with us?
Yes, I thought just pertinent to what you were saying recently is Ed Skine wrote some very good books on leadership and humility and building trust. And just I put it in the chat, just Ed Skine's work, very, very interesting work in that area.
Okay, thank you.
And I think there's a TED talk about it, which is nice because it sums it up in like 45 minutes, but I can't remember where I saw it.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you. That's always interesting to know of, you know, academic research and, you know, issues around leadership that bring in humanity. So that's great. Anyone else got anything they'd like to share at this point, or any questions about the further webinars that are coming up?
If no one's got anything, I listened to a talk by Professor Dan Cable at London Business School, and he's got a really interesting proposition about how work and businesses need to change in the future. And I think coaching fits in so well with what he was talking about. So it's where he's got some TED Talks as well. They're a little bit older, but they were very interesting. He also has a book that came out last year, which I've just waiting to arrive. So I can't tell you what it says yet, but he's fascinating to listen to. Yeah. He talks about getting people excited about work. And I think that's what we want to do in coaching.
Yes, absolutely. You know, because at this very basic level, what's the point of working unless you're enjoying it? And actually, if you want to do well at work, you need to enjoy it as well. So, you know, there's a real sort of basic, you know, sort of almost Maslow hierarchy of needs when it comes to work, that you really need to look after those survival needs, actually enjoying it, because it's pointless otherwise. But Good to Great by Jim Collins is a good one, because in that, you know, he says CEO needs to be asking the questions, not finding the solutions. And I love Brené Brown's books as well about, you know, being courageous. And she's got a great TED talk around being vulnerable and coming out, and you know, and not just about women. I know she supports a lot of women, but also, you know, men in similar sort of situations.
Hi, it's Beverly here.
Sorry. Oh, hi.
I just wanted to ask a question.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think all of this discussion's fantastic, and it's really energizing my thoughts and ideas, because I've got a bit of a blank canvas to play with at the moment. But I'm thinking about the new generation coming through of workers, and I can't remember whether they're Gen Z or whatever they're called now.
Yeah,
sorry.
Gen Z,
but
yes.
I'm just wondering if there's been anything done in terms of understanding how they feel about coaching, or this style of, you know, does it appeal to kind of what their motivations are and what they're looking for from an employer? It's just an open question. I don't know if anyone's come across anything of whether this is the type of style that's more suitable to the younger generation coming through, or, I mean, obviously I do think things need to change and agree with what's been discussed. It was just an open question.
No, thank you for offering that question.
There was some work, Susie, wasn't there, done by, sorry, you carry on whilst I search for it.
So has anyone else got any comments or any answers to Beverly's question? Okay, well, yes, and my memory from this research is that Gen Z are very much more open to a coaching style. They're much more discerning. They're much more into being independent, being innovative and creative, being able to have control over their piece of work, and also working in teams. I think they're much more open to it. And in fact, it helps them to thrive, and, you know, they're less likely to thrive in a do and tell environment. And, you know, working with quite a few senior managers in organizations, they're finding it quite tough working with the younger generation coming in, because they have a very different viewpoint really on how they work with their
They have a different
as well as their
expectation.
managers and their bosses. Yes.
They definitely have a different expectation from management than what maybe 10, 15 years ago people had an expectation.
Absolutely. And one of the things that AQAI has researched into is the fact that, and it came up in the last webinar because I played the video, is that in the next 10 years, our jobs and careers are going to change so much, and as much as it has in the last 100 years. And they will change so much that we don't even know what they will be.
Wow.
And yeah, and that's what their research shows, and which I think is both fascinating but also perhaps a bit scary. You know, where are we going to be in 10 years time? And if you think about the environment too, and COP26, you know, how all these things are going to impact on us. But Karen, did you find anything, or shall we come back on that?
I think we can probably come back on that next week, but there definitely has been some research looking at what Gen Z needs from the world of work.
Yes.
In terms of challenge, variety, flexibility, and also management approach. So I will find that. I'll put my hand on it and have it to hand next week.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Brilliant. And Beverly, who do you work for?
I work for a very small company. It's called Wealth Tech LLP, and we work in financial investments. Okay.
So what's your interest in coaching culture and this field of work?
I did my master's a few years ago, and I did my dissertation on coaching in the workplace.
Okay.
At the time, which was back in 2007.
Excellent. Okay.
And I've always had a really strong interest in it because my background before HR was learning and development.
Okay.
And I've got a business degree, so I've done a lot of management theory and motivational theory, and I've always wanted to make HR more about the positive stuff.
Yes.
About developing people to their full potential and how it can make an impact on the business, rather than obviously moving away from, if you can, discipline grievances and that kind of stuff. I mean, obviously it needs to be dealt with if things occur, but what you really want is a culture where you're hopefully able to iron things out, and you're not spending your time on that, and you're spending your time on developing people and developing the business.
Yeah, what I hear you saying is being more strategic in your role, because HR has got such an opportunity to do that, especially after the pandemic. But thank you for your question, and thank you everyone for your contributions. As you can see from the slide that's up at the moment, next week's webinar, we'll be looking at the ICF coaching culture model and the PCS a lot more, because those are sort of fundamentals in how we work and work with our clients. And Gordon McKenzie will be joining us from PCS, because PCS is actually at an interesting stage of development as well. And then finally, on the 25th, we'll be looking at what's most important, ROI, because there is, research shows if you adopt a coaching culture, there is a positive return on investment. And we look at how we can implement that. And we're working in partnership with the coaching culture community, and Joe Wright, the CEO, is going to come along and join us on that session as well. So I hope you can all join us, and more of you, if you know anyone you'd like to pass the word to, please do. Same time, same place with Joe as usual. And I thank you again for coming along, and really enjoyed the breakout session. So thanks for that. And I'll pass you over to Joe.
Great. Thanks very much, Susan and Karen, for hosting the session. Really appreciate it. I'm sure that everybody's got a lot out of it. As you've already mentioned, we've got the session next Thursday. We're also running an additional boardroom. Susie and Karen aren't facilitating that one next Tuesday. And it actually might tie in quite nicely with this session. And it's about understanding and adopting communication styles. So I will put that link onto the email that I'm going to send out this afternoon, and hopefully see everybody next week. Thank you very much.